everyone, this is Alexa Dunn, and I realized that I've had this channel for about 2 months now. We're going into getting close to month 3, and I still haven't told you about my book. I mean, I've talked about my book. I think I've said it's Jane Eyre in space in multiple videos, and it's right up there on my channel banner as well. Or it was. I recently changed it, but it has my book title and the publisher and the release date on it. But I haven't actually given you a real plot summary or told you about the characters or what inspired me to write it. So today I'm going to be talking a bit more in detail about my book, Brightly Burning. So Brightly Burning is Jane Eyre in space. Ta-da, we're done. Okay. No, so that is my elevator pitch, and it is essentially a high concept pitch. If you want to know what a high concept pitch is, that is a high concept pitch. And I'm really proud of it. I think it's the most clever thing I've ever come up with, and it is never going to happen again. My previous ideas were definitely not quite as high concept. I mean, I could do them in a couple of sentences, but not in something as compact and flashy as that. I actually have had a habit of writing in beautifully dead genres. Tropes. I've written dead tropes. I love dead tropes. They're a thing that I like. But yeah, so Jane Eyre in space is my baby. I came up with the idea in 2013, late 2013 actually, but it took me another 2 years before I even tried to write it. And I came up with the idea for the book in the shower. And if you've watched my writer's block video, and I think I might have also mentioned it in the starting and finishing a novel video, I think the shower is a fantastic place to brainstorm and have breakthroughs about your writing. And I don't know why, but I was taking a shower one day in late 2013, and I was like, I really love YA retellings, and I love Jane Eyre. It's my two perennial favorites since I was a teenager have been Jane Eyre and Pride and Prejudice. Though I would like to shout out Persuasion, which is my current favorite Jane Austen. It edged Pride and Prejudice off of that pedestal in my late 20s, but regardless, Jane Eyre and Pride and Prejudice, the perennials. And we have seen so many Pride and Prejudice YA retellings. There, and not just YA, an adult as well. There's Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. There are just so many Pride and Prejudice retellings. But I couldn't really think of a juicy Jane Eyre retelling in YA, especially genre. Science fiction and fantasy are my favorite genres to read, and I was like, I wonder why. And to be fair, there have been some Jane Eyre YA books published, but I would argue that they're not really YA. If you look at them, they were really adult books that had crossover potential and were kind of marketed to the YA space, but I think there's a reason that they didn't break out. And I was showering, and I was like, well, maybe it hasn't worked for a reason. How would you do that? Maybe it's because Gothics are really hard to make work in modern YA without them feeling kind of antiquated and weird. And then, there's the fact that the love interest is definitely in his 40s. So how would I make that work? Because I figured there had to be a solution, because Jane Eyre is basically the OG YA novel. It totally is. Jane is 18 years old. It's a first-person narrative. It's all about her feelings, and it's a coming-of-age narrative and about becoming her own person. It is a YA novel. I was like, okay, so maybe it's the Gothic thing. Well, how would you make that work? And I went, you set it in space. And it was just ping. I was like, yes, that is what you do. You combine Jane Eyre with Battlestar Galactica. That is how you do a YA Jane Eyre retelling. And then I was like, Jane Eyre in space, I must write this. And then I did not for 2 years. I actually touched on that in I think it was my Agent Story video, that I was afraid to write it because I didn't think I was good enough or that I was ready, because in my mind this is going to be a beautiful literary novel that happened to be set on a creepy Gothic spaceship, and I am not a beautiful literary writer. I know at that time I'd only written one book, and I just thought, your second book is not the time to tackle your big, dream project, right? So I wrote another book, and then that didn't work. Again, if you've seen my Agent Story video, I had to shelve that book. And that's when Jane Eyre in Space became my F it novel, to kind of, gloss over my profanity a bit there. And I just said, you know what, F it, I'm gonna write this book the way I want to write it, the way I'm able to and capable of writing it right now in this very moment, which meant, way more commercial. It's not a literary novel. And, maybe it never should have been a literary novel. I think the book that we write is the book that we are meant to write in that moment that we write it. And in this case, Brightly Burning was meant to be the book that it is. And it is commercial and a bit splashy and very brooding and romantic. And it's fun. And it doesn't have, beautiful purple prose, because that is not the kind of writer I am. I'm a pretty crisp writer. I'm trained in journalism, so, there's a couple navel-gazing moments, and there's some pretty prose, but it's a pretty brisk writing style on purpose. But yeah, so I finally wrote this book I started in 2015, and I finished it in early 2016, and I sold it to a publisher in April of this year, 2017, and it comes out next year, May 1st, 2018. So now that I've said Jane Eyre in space like 8 million times, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the actual book and like the setting and like how I made it work without revealing all of my secrets, so that you actually still maybe want to read it. So the book is a near future science fiction novel set approximately 200 years in the future, probably a tick more, but there was a supervolcano explosion and it triggered an ice age, and so a small subset of humanity was able to flee this impending explosion and ice age and go up into space in fancy spaceships. And they orbit the Earth in a fleet of ships who are essentially waiting out the ice age, and they're waiting for the Earth to thaw so that they can go back down. But it's actually slightly past the time that they thought they would have to wait. There were, conservative estimates that it would be over at around the 200-year mark, and this is a tick past that, and things are kind of dire. A lot of spaceships are falling apart. There's limited resources. A lot of people, get sick. There's not medical care for everyone, and so there's a high mortality rate, especially among the poor ships. And, if you've read Jane Eyre, I came up with this because I wanted an analog for Lowood School, and that's kind of how this all came about. Because our main character, Stella, who is Jane Eyre, she lives on the Stalwart, which is the equivalent of Lowood School if Lowood School were a giant spaceship that produced food for the fleet. So that's where she lives. She was sent there 6 years ago by her terrible Aunt Reed, as part of an orphan transport program after a deadly virus killed a bunch of people, and her aunt saw this opportunity to ship her off somewhere else. So she shipped her off to the Stalwart, which is a farming ship, a working ship, but Stella has skills in engineering because her father was an engineer, so she becomes an engineering apprentice, so she's a part of the engineering corps. But she doesn't really like her job. She happens to be good at it, but she's kind of depressed at the idea of kind of being stuck on this ship for the rest of her life, the ship that is falling apart, and the rest of her life may therefore be incredibly short, because if the Stalwart, has a critical failure, they're just gonna fall out of the sky and have to go back down to Earth, and everyone thinks that deorbiting is a death sentence because it's just too cold. They have had a couple of ships go down to Earth the past couple of years, and no one has ever heard from them again. So she's full of this sense of kind of impending dread that she's stuck in this place that she doesn't want to be. She also feels like a real social outcast on the Stalwart. Like, she has a friend, George, who was also from her original ship, the Empire, which is my fancy British ship. But like, she doesn't really feel a strong connection with a lot of people, and especially not the other girls, which is not she's not like other girls, girl hating thing, by the way. I'm very careful with that because I hate that trope. But I think it's really common. A lot of us feel this way, especially in high school, that, if you're kind of intense and bookish or, quieter than other people, that you can kind of feel that it's tough to connect and you can feel kind of alone. So Stella has a teaching skill set. She teaches some classes on board the Stalwart, but that's going to end soon and she's going to have to commit to engineering full time. So she applies for some governess positions on other ships. She's turned down for all of them except for this random private ship called the Rochester. She gets this job out of nowhere, and she gets this message. It's like, we're going to pick you up in 3 days, bye. And so she picks up all of her stuff, and she leaves everything behind and goes to this strange private ship. And I mean, that's where the novel kicks off. And if you've read Jane Eyre, I think you've got a pretty good idea of what you're going to find there. You know, it's a luxurious ship, maybe not the most luxurious. It's very dark. There's not many people there. There are weird sounds. And there's a brooding tortured captain named Hugo Fairfax. So you can kind of sense as I'm talking about it, like I took bits from Jane Eyre and I played with them, but it's not, a straight thing. Very few characters have the exact same names, though I did. Aunt Reed is still Aunt Reed, and I've also still got a Miss Ingram, though her name is Bianca instead of Blanche. So I had a lot of fun playing with the story. I love retellings. I will probably do like a whole video just about like why I love retellings, what you can do with retellings, way to make your retellings kind of stand out and be more original. Because I really loved playing with the core elements of Jane Eyre that people love, which is, characters, setting, place, but also themes, feelings, and emotions. I did make changes. If you read, you'll discover there's no Helen, which I think will upset some people, but I just couldn't figure out a way to do Helen without it being incredibly melodramatic. There are other tweaks that I made to the central mystery. There is a whole big subplot that definitely doesn't exist in Jane Eyre. And all I'm going to say is I did something with that slightly inert third act where Jane wanders around the moors and teaches school, and there's St. John and like his sisters. Like, that is not in my book. Though there is a St. John character, and I think he might be my favorite, and I kind of started almost shipping him with Stella, aka Jane Eyre, and I had like a crisis moment of like, what are you doing? And don't worry, I only write happy endings, so. But yeah, that is kind of Brightly Burning in a nutshell. And if you guys are interested, if you want to hear more, I can do further videos. I can talk more in depth about, the characters, the choices that I made, etc. And if you subscribe to my newsletter, I'm doing a bit of that. I have been introducing my characters. I introduced Stella and I introduced Hugo in my last 2 editions. In future editions, I'll be giving them some of the very details you're getting in this video. So if you are a newsletter subscriber, this is spoilers? I don't know. But I would love to talk more about it. I mean, I'm an author. Of course I want to talk about my book. But let me know if you're interested. Like, drop a comment down below. I will tell you anything I can tell you, because there's a lot that goes on in it, and I don't want to spoil the best bits. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed finding out a bit more about my debut novel, Brightly Burning. As I mentioned, it comes out May 1st from HMH Teen. So thank you for watching.